the easiest things to overlook are often the most powerful. When education is widely accessible, it can feel like a natural part of growing up. Children enroll in school, advance each year, and graduate with the expectation that their learning will continue. In these contexts, schooling can appear as predictable and oftentimes as inevitable. However, because education can appear as so ordinary, it can be difficult to imagine circumstances in which education relies strictly on limited possibilities and family struggles. However, for millions of girls across the globe, education relies on solely those conditions. Despite global improvements in primary education over the past few decades, over 120 million girls remain out of school. And these crises only evolve, with enrollment and graduation rates declining, specifically in regions such as South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and other areas experiencing economic instability. However, in order to provide a solution to this harmful pattern, we need to identify specifically what inhibits girls from accessing or ever completing the quality education that they deserve. Arguably, the most easily identifiable barrier is financial issues. Even when tuition is removed as a cost, schooling can introduce additional fees such as for uniforms, transportations, or supplies, which can accumulate and become significant barriers over time, specifically to families that rely on seasonal or irregular income. In such contexts, education is more than a matter of just enrollment, but instead a difficult decision that families need to make between their immediate survival needs and the long-term benefit of providing their daughters with education. However, even still, in third world countries, we see a pattern of boys being able to attend school for at least an effective amount of years. Then why don't we see this occurring for girls? Within households, each member contributes towards maintaining the daily stability. In many third world countries, young girls contribute towards maintaining the household in significant ways that may not be easily visible outside the home. Therefore, when she's consistently absent due to school, that absence shifts her responsibility to those of other family members, which may create an uncomfortable environment for those families that are more preferable to tend to more traditional family systems. Moreover, social norms and expectations further constrain these ideas. Within these same households, sons are associated with providing long-term economic security in the future for parents, while daughters are expected to join another household earlier on through marriage. Therefore, in cases where families have a limited amount of funding, oftentimes the male child's education will be prioritized with the belief that only he can provide educational and financial care in the future for his family. However, economic vulnerability clashes with more lightly discussed issues that occur within these same regions. For families that struggle to provide the basic needs for their children, they're often cultivated to view early marriage as a form of financial protection for their children. In countries such as Niger, Chad, and Mali, where female education rates remain at an all-time low, child marriage remains at over 70 to 80% across the population for minors. With the belief that girls are unable to take on respected careers, as well as limited funds being prioritized for the male's education, early marriage or child marriage appears as a genuine solution to lead to the well-being of many daughters. However, even after marriage, women only struggle more to find the limited possibility that they have of establishing and completing their own education. Domestic responsibilities, expectations around the household, and in many contexts, early childbearing reshapes how time is organized for them, gradually making education more increasingly difficult for them to pursue. To continue, additional communities provide additional and new barriers towards education. As girls grow up, social ideas around safety and certain cautions may increase as they develop. In many areas, schools may be located far from home and require travel through areas that families consider as unsafe. Moreover, social norms around modesty and what is considered around appropriate behavior can further constrain ability for a girl to engage freely in school. These small social disruptions having a large impact on whether or not a girl has access to her education demonstrates how small cultural judgments can have a large influence on whether or not a girl can access her own schooling. To continue, in areas that are impacted by political crisis or political instability, these issues are only magnified. Violence can disrupt communities and political and educational institutions alike, forcing temporary or permanent school closures. Families must prioritize their own survival when their own lives are interrupted. And in many of these situations, girls and young daughters are the first to give up their education in order to support their families, with education and schooling now being almost impossible for them to pursue. Looking throughout all of these issues, it's evident that there is a certain pattern. Female educational disparity is rarely the result of one single barrier. Instead, certain issues such as early marriage, safety, and political crisis and everyday practical changes reenact with each other and reinforce each other. However, we simply can't just accept a world where female educational disparity continues. By removing a girl from education, removing her from an educational environment, you're moving her of her chances in being able to dictate and change her own future. Placing a girl in an educational environment provides her with the opportunity to make her own decisions based on her own independence, rather than based on other social structures. It gives her an area where her voice is encouraged, her questions are heard, and her abilities are developed instead of retained. So now that we understand the importance of maintaining girls' education, and we understand specifically what inhibits girls from completing this, what stands as our solution? A realistic global strategy, which would be provide conditional support for families delivered locally. Governments and NGOs from more developed countries can provide small, reliable monthly stipends or food credits tied specifically to girls' attendance for areas in less developed countries. Research consistently shows us that when certain families receive small, conditional, modest cash support, they're able to see a certain rise in attendance occurring for girls. Because the trade-off between a girl's labor at home and her consistent attendance at school isn't exactly as painful to the stability of the household. To continue, in order to add to our solution, we can construct and establish community-based learning centers that have a walkable distance away from rural areas, hire and train more local female teachers, and also be able to invest in more adequate sanitation and menstrual hygiene facilities. With this, students are able to increase their own learning and be able to contribute more within academic environments. Overall, it's important that we gather certain solutions in order to be able to address the issue of female educational disparity. Because although the issue is complex, it's not entirely unsolvable. We can still address this issue through providing our own support for more developed countries and responding to the needs of those in less developed areas. Because when we individually respond to individual girls of other resources and areas, we can then change entire generations, families, and communities. Thank you.